Before we get into this week's interview on the Signal Sit-Down, ring that bell to get notifications on future Signal Sit-Down content. Hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you may be joining us. And then while you're at it, please leave us a 5-star review and comment who you'd like to see on a future episode of the Signal Sit-Down. Remember, it's your government. It's your country. And together, we're taking it back. Without further ado, here's the interview.
We must all hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately.
They knew that this would be regarded by the king and parliament as an act of treason.
So the people who signed that were basically saying we're revolting against the most powerful country in the world.
The Declaration of Independence reminds Americans who they are. Its words are ingrained in our memory. Its virtues are etched into our character. Its principles are impressed upon our destiny. Its signers carved out a new nation in the New World. For 250 years, the Declaration of Independence has inspired their descendants to defend their liberties.
Liberty doesn't want passed from one generation to the next through the bloodstream. It has to be fought for, defended, won with every generation.
But there's nothing more important for which we would give our lives.
But history has a way of making the unthinkable seem inevitable. But the Declaration of Independence was never inevitable. The Declaration of Independence is the culmination of one of the greatest political dramas in history. As ideas clashed, as armies gathered, as the fate of a continent hung in the balance, the hopes of millions wanting independence rested with a small group of statesmen willing to risk everything they had, their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor. This is the story behind America's Declaration of Independence. The story of how a declaration became a nation. Sacred Honor, the declaration that defines a nation. Available now on the Daily Signal's YouTube channel. Paul Kengor, welcome to the Signal Sit-Down.
It's great to be here, Brad. Very cool. Thanks.
We're super happy to have you because you are out with a new book called American Pontiff. This is a biography and a synopsis of what we think this papacy is going to be like,
right?
By analyzing the upbringing of the first American Pope.
Crazy.
Who is American in the North American sense, in the South American sense.
Right.
And this has led to a lot of confusion and consternation on the diplomatic side. So we'll talk about all of those things. But first and foremost, we're a year into this papacy now.
Right.
A year of an American Pope, Pope Leo XIV. Where do things stand? What major moves have been made? So a year is a bit of a short period of time, but there has been some major things that have happened.
Yeah, there have. And really, Brad, I mean, one of the things that I predicted, right, it wasn't much of a prediction, right? The people that elected Robert Francis Prevost and the election, I mean, well, first of all, the fact that an American pontiff, an American was chosen Pope is just astonishing, right? I mean, completely astonishing. But as I started doing research and we got information, especially from Vaticanistas, Italian journalists and so forth, the overwhelming desire of the College of Cardinals, and there were 135 of them that were voting cardinals, 133 actually made it to the conclave. This would have been May 7th, 2025. And they all wanted stability and normalcy brought back to the papacy, right? After 12 years of Francis, everybody, whether they were liberal, conservative, moderate, they were all tired of the chaos and division. There was a lack of peace in the church, right? And it's very telling that his first words when he walks out onto the loggia, May 8th, 2025, was peace. In fact, in Italian, la pace sia con tutti voi, peace be with all of you. And I'll never forget that because first he walks out, and I'm astonished, right? I was at our office at American Spectator. We were preparing for an event that night. In fact, I think you were probably at the event. And the white smoke went up, and fourth ballot. So within like about 24 hours, right? We had a Habemus Papam. We had a pope. And everybody thought this was going to go through the weekend, right? So at that point, you think, okay, it must have been somebody like Cardinal Parolin or Tagle from the Philippines. And instead, walking out was an American of all things. And first, the proto-deacon Mamberti comes out and says the name, right? Robertum. And at that point, I thought, wow, they picked Robert Serra, right? the African, right? The conservative African. And then they said something.
The most conservative papabile.
Right. And who everybody thought was too old, and really was. This time had passed, right? And then, Francescum, and I thought, I have no idea who this is. No idea who this is. And then he said, Prevost. And then the translator I listened to said, an American, Robert Francis Prevost. And I'm standing there with Leonora Cravata and Steve Kaputska, who you know from American Spectator. And they're like, well, what do you think? And I was speechless. I know nothing about him. And I absolutely know nothing about him. So we wait a little bit, and then he walks out. And I remember, so that's what he looked like when he walked out.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, he looks like a pope, first of all, right? And he actually looks like it. Francis came out in all white. And this is part of the answer to your question, too. So right away, he's dressed traditionally. He's dressed like the way Benedict XVI came out, Cardinal Ratzinger, the way Karol Wojtyła came out in 1978, John Paul II. So that itself is different. And then he comes out, he walks up to the microphone, and he puts his hands under his chin kind of pensively, right? Prayerfully. And I've since found out people who went to school with him in Little Dalton, Illinois, one woman said he was very devout, very pious. He would always put his hands under his chin and pray like that. And they called him Holy, right? And that was like his nickname. Hey, Holy, come over here. But it wasn't to ridicule. She said he wasn't weird. Everybody liked him. He was nice. He was kind, but he was just genuinely pious and holy. So he comes out and he's trying, and I could tell he's thinking, he swallows, taking in the moment. And everyone's thinking, what's going to be the first words? And so he says, La pace sia con tutti voi. Remember, the British translator was like, kind of laughed and said, peace be with all of you. And I thought at that point, if you had scripted it, I couldn't think of a better phrase than that after 12 years of a lack of peace under Francis. So the way that they voted, and I know I'm already going back and everything, and just pull me back on track if you need to, but we now know that in the first round of voting, the top three vote getters were Erdo from Hungary, the conservative, Parolin, and Prevost. And they all got like 20.
Parolin was like the establishment pick. He
Exactly.
was the Secretary of State of the Vatican.
That's right. That's right.
And Erdo was kind of this conservative outsider challenger who had really made a name for himself in Budapest.
He did.
Being a counter signal is the wrong way to put it, but a conservative countermeasure to some of the things that the Francis pontificate was doing.
Right.
And there was clearly an appetite for that.
Sure.
In the College of Cardinals, from what you are describing here.
Yeah, and a counter to what the German Cardinals were doing, right next door, close to next door. So they were in like almost a three-way tie, and Erdo made a strong showing for the conservatives, and Parolin did okay. And then this is the way that it works, right? In these conclaves, you might be on and Prevost was listed among the papabile, but only like Ed Penton has a list of his College of Cardinals report where he covered like 24 possible papabile, right, popable candidates. The Vegas betting odds, I mean, if you had put down $100 on Prevost, you would have been a rich man on May 8th, 2025. So, but it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe like a political primary in a way. Once you get a big number of votes, all of a sudden you're on everybody's radar and everybody's like, right? Hadn't really thought of him. And then from there, from what we know, Parolin hit his ceiling, which seemed to be somewhere in the range of 40, 50, 60 votes. And from there, Prevost, the one guy that everybody thought, this is a normal guy, very stable, very sensible, moderate in temperament, right? Orthodox, small o, committed to the church, to the teachings of the church. From there, he just took off. And by the fourth ballot, He got 108 votes, we're told, out of 133. So this was a landslide. I don't know who came in second, if it was 108 to like 15 or some but I mean, this wasn't even close. And everybody said, as diverse as liberal Jesuit LGBTQ priest Father James Martin, and who's not a voting cardinal, of course, and Cardinal Raymond Leo Burke, all said everybody was hungering for somebody to bring back normalcy. They just wanted to bring back stability. So among my predictions was that after a year or so of the papacy, you would just see things slowly get back to normal. And everything would be completely cool if not for the blow up with Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
That's what really led to kind of a conflagration and blow up. Had it not been for that, everything would have been, I think, very smooth. And I'm getting emails now from conservative friends who are saying, "Why hasn't Francis done, or what? Francis, why hasn't Prevost? Why hasn't Leo done this? Why hasn't he done that?" He's probably going to do that, but he's going to do it slower. And he's not the kind of guy who's going to come in and like reverse fiducia supplicans or something like that. He's going to quietly do things his own way because he doesn't want to rock the boat. He wants to bring peace and stability and order back to the Pope, to the papacy.
So we'll talk about the diplomacy stuff later on with the United States, because there's a lot of complicated threads to untangle there. But first, you said normalcy, stability. How has he gone about that in the first year? Is it a rhetorical stance or a rhetorical alignment? Is it through appointments? Is it through, different ways that he's restructuring the papacy itself, or returning the old structures to the papacy itself? How did he return normalcy to the papacy?
Yeah, kind of all of the above. But like, for example, he hasn't come out and said, the war against traditionalists is over, right?
Mm-hmm.
He hasn't stood up and said something like that. But the war against traditionalists under Francis is clearly over, right? Right off, gave Cardinal Burke permission to do a mass in Rome at the Vatican, a TLM mass, right? TLM people are not being persecuted like they were before. And in fact, different bishops in America that were liberal bishops who were going after TLM people and traditionalists have just, by and large, slowly stopped doing it. I mean, there are a couple of exceptions, especially the Bishop of Charlotte, who, gosh, I mean, this guy. But he got talked to by Robert Francis Prevost at the Vatican. So that's Bishop Martin from Charlotte. But he's just slowly. So he gave a really revealing interview a few months into his papacy where he said, "My style of dealing with people is I bring everybody together around the table. I let everyone have their say. I let everyone speak. And then after listening carefully to everybody," and I was really struck when he said this, Brad, because I thought, yeah, from the people I've interviewed, he's been doing that for 30 years.
Yeah.
Back with the Augustinians and everybody. I have everybody speak. I have everybody give their point of view. And then I say, okay, friends, right? Let's see if we can reach a consensus, if we could reach agreement. And he said, I don't compromise on principle, right? I mean, I'm not going to change some church doctrine, but I try to let everybody have their say and figure out a way basically to make peace, right? So his way is not the Francis way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Francis was a wrecking ball for good and for ill, in a lot of ways, right? And he came at a time when the church felt like it was becoming unmoored. And I entered the church under the Francis pontificate, which is such a weird thing to say, because all of the young men who are joining the church, especially at that tail end of the Francis pontificate, are attracted to the smells and bells and the permanent things that the church offers. And a lot of folks who are cradle Catholic or who have been Catholic for a very long time thought that the Francis pontificate was a threat to those things. It was, in a way, but a lot of the church's activity is still controlled and it's a bottom-up activity, right? It's your friends, it's your community, it's your local diocese. And a lot of those still exist in the United States of America and across the world, of course. And so there's always this confusion where, like, you joined during the Francis pontificate, but you're this traditional right-winger. Like, didn't you know the Latin Mass folks were getting cracked down? I was like, yeah, no, I remember. And I was one of the converts who were going to these Latin Masses.
However, I think what we're already seeing among Leo, and the numbers around the world, even in places like France and Ireland and the United States, for the last March, April, when people Easter Vigil, when people come into the church, everybody was astonished by how high the numbers were, especially among young men. And I call that the post-Francis effect, because I know of a lot of people, and I could name names, but I won't, who were waiting to come into the church and wanted to, but the Francis papacy suddenly made them say,
that is exactly the point that I was driving to.
Man.
Now you have someone in Rome who feels like it's backing that vision of the church.
Yes. And those people are going to come in now.
And now it's like what started with Francis, not because of Francis necessarily, but what started in Francis' pontificate is going to just continue to grow and grow and grow, especially if the church is stable,
right,
and it maintains its vision and its doctrines, and it settles down.
And that's the goal, really, of Leo. That's like the plan.
This is the plan, and you look back on his life. I mean, you've already mentioned it a few times, that this is something that's deeply embedded in his character.
Right.
Tell us how that character was formed, his background, his upbringing. He's an American Pope. I think, especially for you, who has written a book about JP2 and President Ronald Reagan,
right.
I bet in your lifetime, the closest you thought you were going to get to an American Pope was JP2.
Right.
And now we have this American Pope. So take us through a biography of Pope Leo XIV, of Robert Prevost, and how this character was formed.
By the way, Frank Shakespeare, who was the second ambassador to the Vatican under Reagan, told me when he was telling me that there would never be an American Pope, right? Which I agreed with. I didn't argue. I was like, yeah, of course there's never going to be an American Pope. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, because the leader of the world's temporal power and spiritual power, they just both can't be Americans, right? It'd be considered too much of a concentration of American influence, right? And especially under someone like Donald Trump, right? They would never pick an American at that point. But the Italians had a saying about Prevost. They said he's the least American of the Americans. Because now it turns out, as I show really carefully in the book, he's a very American. However, he spent most of his priestly service, his time, the Augustinian order, prior to that, 1990s, 1980s, abroad in Latin America. And I think it's one of the reasons why he so appealed to he was appealing to Francis, because Francis, almost every single American cardinal that he picked was ideologically liberal, right? It's like, what's going on here? What is this? But in the case of Prevost, if they had known anything about his background at all and the statements that he had made, including at a synod under Benedict XVI, where he's condemning homosexuality, same-sex marriage, abortion, gender ideology, all of that stuff, those would have all been red flags for Francis. But what appealed to Francis was that Francis had this kind of crude saying, I want priests, bishops who smell like the flock, right? Who get out there, who smell like the sheep, who get out there among the sheep. And Prevost had done that. So he left Chicago, left that area, goes into the backwoods of Peru, where he walks into churches that have dirt floors, and really truly got in there with the flock. So in that sense, he was the one American cardinal who, frankly, when I read the list of American cardinals, I'm like, who's Prevost? Who is this guy, right? But if you go back to his roots, I mean, he's a quintessentially American. He comes from Chicago, born in Chicago, which is the world's melting pot of all things. They did a DNA analysis of him and an ancestral analysis. Who's the guy that does the show on PBS, Finding Your Roots? Gates, right?
Yeah.
Is it Gates? Henry Louis Gates, is that correct? And he said we were struck by the Pope has one of the most diverse family ancestral trees that we've ever seen. I mean, his mother's surname was Martinez. So he's part, she was Latino, partly Creole. He's from Louisiana, relatives from, on the father's side, mother's side, France, Italy, Haiti, maybe Dominican Republic. He seems to have black ancestry, in his background. In fact, it prompted Sunny, what's her name on The View?
Sonny Hostin.
Yes, to say, we've got our first black pope, right? And it's like, well, actually, there have been black popes, right? So this wouldn't be the first, right? But I want to call him a black pope, all right? But this is a pope, an American pope who's got African American genes in his ancestry. In fact, he probably has slavery in his background. So what you end up with is this. The word Catholic means universal. You have probably the most universal pope that you've actually ever had, the most diverse in terms of ethnicity pope that we've ever had. Prior to John Paul II, there had been 455 consecutive years of nothing but Italian popes, right? The pope was always Italian. What's John Paul II? He's the first Slavic pope ever, first pope from Poland ever. Then comes Cardinal Ratzinger, Benedict XVI. He's German. He's like pure German. Then comes Francis, who was raised in Argentina, but he's Italian, right? Jorge Mario Bergoglio. His family came from Italy. This guy is truly what we in America call a mutt, right? This guy is a mix of everything. So in that sense, he's a very American, grew up in Chicago White Sox fan. So I think it's really kind of cool that that the first American pontiff is probably, quite possibly the most universal in terms of ethnicity pope that we've ever had in the history of the Catholic Church.
What do you think is not? You have mentioned this, that they don't want the spiritual and the temporal power represented by the same nationality. Sensible, okay, but America has existed much longer than our brief time as a superpower. An American pontiff before that time as a superpower, 1945, maybe you want to drop back a little bit farther, but that would have been unthinkable then. And even if America declined and we were no longer the world superpower, China was the world superpower come year 2100, I think in your mind, you would still struggle to imagine prior to Pope Leo that there would be an American pope by the year 2100.
Right. I never thought it'd be in my lifetime.
Never in your lifetime, and potentially never in your kids' or your grandkids' lifetime, right? So what do you think changed? Is there a mentality shift happening at the Vatican, in the College of Cardinals, in the church itself, on America itself?
Well, the largest number of cardinals comes from Italy, okay? And then the second largest block is from the United States, right? So right there between the two, I'm going to have to do the math, but I think it's probably close to 30 cardinals. And then, so America has the second largest number. However, that's nowhere near enough to give you 108 votes. By the way, Cardinal Devlin was dubbed by the Italian press as the kingmaker, as the American who was really pushing for Robert Francis Prevost. And Dolan's a great guy, and like you talk about it like a quintessentially American.
That's an American
right
exactly, there. Yeah.
Right. You can see him really pushing for this to make it happen. But in the case of Prevost, they just had a sense that this wasn't somebody who was going to go in and like represent America, right? Like, immediately go to the White House and sit next to Donald Trump and try to have some sort of Pax Americana. This was somebody that was committed to the church. And when he first went out onto the loggia, it's very interesting. He didn't speak English at all. And I remember that struck a few Americans who were like, why didn't he speak any English? So he comes out, he speaks Italian, La pace sia con tutti voi. He speaks mostly Italian, Latin, and then
he also knows that he has to convince the Italians that he can be their bishop.
That's right. That's exactly right. He's the Bishop of Rome. And then he does, and this is how typical of him because he's very thoughtful. The entire text, prepared text of what he said, and he must have written some notes. He had maybe an hour to write this. Right. If even that. You get picked, and then they ask you, do you accept? Accepto. And then he accepts. And then he goes into the room of tears. And then he's got about an hour to do all of this. When Francis went out, he had a deer in the headlights look, right? He's like, fratelli, sorelle, right? Brothers and sisters, buonasera, a good evening, go have a good dinner, goodbye, right? And this guy used the word peace, I think, 10 times in his prepared script. So he had it all thought out. But he comes out, so speaks Italian, speaks Latin, and then speaks Spanish as like a shout out to his home diocese in Peru, right? That's really that was his diocese. And so no English at all at that point. And that must have been deliberate. And if you really think about it, okay, well, what are his dioceses? He was bishop. He had the one in Peru, so he's speaking to them in Spanish. He's Bishop of Rome. And Bishop of Rome, they speak Italian. And the universal language of the Catholic Church is Latin. So that's what he spoke. Guy thinks of everything, right? Mm-hmm. Then the next day, in his first mass, that's when he came out and spoke English. I don't even remember this, but
100%.
When I heard audio of that, I thought, oh,
this is weird.
Yeah, this is weird. It's pretty cool. He's got kind of a soft voice and a Chicago accent, a little bit, kind of like Chicago, like a little bit, but not too pronounced. And yeah, that's the first time that he spoke English.
You can tell that it's faded a little bit, the Chicago accent.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you can. Yeah. Right, for sure.
But he came out and he chose Pope Leo XIV.
Yeah, what a name.
Because of this AI revolution that we are on the cusp of. And of course, Pope Leo XIII, his named predecessor of his name, was the Pope during the Industrial Revolution, and was tasked with guiding the church through a very extreme time of tumult and upheaval. Why do you think he sees AI as this technology as something that the church really needs to keep its eye on? And two, it's one thing to say, I'm going to focus on AI. It's another thing to choose the name Leo because of it and to connect the Industrial Revolution to the AI revolution.
Yeah.
What do you think he sees in Leo that he wants to carry into the 21st century?
Yeah. By the way, kudos to Michael Knowles, who called the name.
Did he?
He called the name. In fact,
I had no idea.
My student, Grace Riley, former student who I do the American Spectator Weekend Spectator podcast with, she texted me. She said, "Did you know that Knowles actually called the name Leo the XIV?" I said, "What?" And she sent it to me. I talked to Knowles about this, and he did. He called the name. And when he first came out, and they announced Robertum Francescum Prevost, and then they said takes the name, and they said in Latin Leo the XIV. That immediately reassured a lot of people because everybody thought, "Oh, what a great name!" Mm-hmm. Because if he had picked, God forbid, Francis too. I know I'm being really hard on Francis. I defended Francis for like almost all 12 years. I wrote a long piece for Crisis Magazine defending him. I go through all of that in the book. I talk about my ambivalence on Francis. But if he had picked Francis too, conservatives would have been jumping off of buildings. If he had picked John Paul III, I don't know how that would have been received. Benedict XVII, then everybody would have said, "Oh, he's a conservative." If he had picked my favorite, Pius XIII.
I was going to say Pius was...
No one's done that yet. Who was not Hitler's Pope, by the way. All right, it was not. That's all nonsense. Horrible scholarship by the communists, by Stalin. I've written about that on many occasions. I actually have footnotes on that in the book. But so you have to go back and back and back, and then it's like, wow, Leo XIII is the one Pope that everybody likes, right? That liberal Catholics like, moderates, conservatives, and even Protestants. I mean, at Grove City College, in our Western Civ course curriculum, we read Rerum Novarum, right? I think guys like Abraham Kuyper were writing about Rerum Novarum. So he comes out the next day, and the first time when he speaks English, he says, "And now let me explain why I took the name of Leo XIII." And he went right to AI. And because Rerum Novarum means of new things, and the threat at that age was new technologies coming in to replace workers, right, in traditional occupations, farm, whatever. This is the period of the Industrial Revolution. Communists are ramping up. Leo XIII had a bunch of really good encyclicals on communism as well. Rerum Novarum condemns socialism repeatedly and is a vigorous defense of private property and also of labor. So it's a great document. So that comes out in 1891. And by the way, Centesimus Annus by John Paul II, 100 years later, is fantastic. Everybody should read that. It's 1891. And Quadragesimo Anno in 1931 by Pius XI. That's the one where the Pope said, you cannot be at the same time a Christian and a socialist, or a Catholic and a socialist. The two are incompatible.
And these are like, of course, the fundamentals of the church is the Eucharist and much, much deeper.
Yeah.
But these encyclicals that you're talking about right now is this band that people often refer to here in the United States as Catholic social teaching. This is often the documents that you put in front of students to teach them about Catholic's social teaching in the modern era.
Right.
Rerum Novarum.
That's the best for it.
All of it. All of those types of documents. And so continue. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's good. So he picks that because he sees AI as this next big, like, kind of technological change that's going to affect workers, people. I mean, it's going to replace doctors, nurses. I mean, people are already self-diagnosing, right? And I used to be in the medical field. I was pre-med. I actually worked for a hospital for 4 years at University of Pittsburgh. And people are telling me about doctors and nurses just going right to AI right away and checking things. It can replace editors. It can replace all kinds of people. So he sees the benefits of AI, but he also sees the pitfalls. And so he wants to, as a theologian, a leader of the flock should, right, try to help navigate the flock through these new changes. And important to know about him too, he is a man of science. He's actually a mathematician.
Right.
At Villanova, he majored in math. And I think there's some fascinating insights on
that. That went to Villanova. It's just wild.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that wild? And at Villanova, he was one of the founders of the Pro-Life Club at Villanova, and he marched in some of the first marches for life in the United States. But mathematicians, and I quote various sources on this in the book, mathematicians understand that there are that there are absolute forces in the universe, right? 2 + 2 = 4. I quote one guy saying, God is a mathematician, right? The world is designed, right? He's a designer. He's an engineer. And so mathematicians generally have a very orderly mind. They're not relativists, right? E = mc², right? Force equals mass times acceleration. 2 + 2 = 4. 10 times 10 = 100. There's no way around that, right? You're going to have relativistic math. So he comes to this as a scientist, somebody who's interested in astronomy, the stars. And he's really, I think, an ideal pope to deal with a challenge like AI.
And it's interesting because what we know of his stance on AI is very similar to the stance that the Trump administration has taken on AI. It is not Luddite. Actually, technological innovation is natural for humans.
Yes.
And necessary. Now,
can't avoid it.
Is it always good? No. That is where both the Trump administration and Pope Leo XIV agree. And this is a message that the Trump administration has had to take to Europe at several points in time, saying, if you want to defend Western culture and the Western way of life, you need to make sure that your approach to these new technologies is not just blanket accommodation, but it is not strangling innovation, something that's very natural for humans to do, in the crib.
Yes.
And that was a hard lesson for the Europeans to take. I know that J.D. Vance took that message to the Europeans.
Right.
Marco Rubio has taken that message.
Yeah, because Vance loved the encyclical. He really praised the encyclical.
And here we are.
Called it brilliant, profound.
These are the two. They seem very aligned on this issue, but that hasn't been the focus.
Right.
The focus, of course, in the last, 6 months to a year has been, of course, immigration and foreign policy.
Right, the war with Iran.
First and foremost, though, where does this division start between Pope Leo XIV and the Trump administration?
It's only two issues, immigration and the war with Iran. I mean, that's it. I mean, those are really the only two. And, that really led Donald Trump to just erupt at one point, and I'll get to that, but on the issue of immigration.
Which is somewhat understandable from Trump's perspective, because he's like, I am one of the only leaders in the world who agree with you and fight for you on 300 different issues that the Catholic Church cares about. But you selectively choose these two to constantly beat us over the head with.
Yeah, well, let me hit immigration first because it's quick and easy, all right? And so the Pope said that, now keep in mind, folks, right? And I try to tell people this about Francis. Here's the defense of Francis. When Francis made the comment about gates and walls and everything, and the Pope represents, or the president defends the Constitution of the United States. He represents a country with borders, right? His constituency has literal boundaries, right? His constituency is Americans. He upholds the laws of Congress, immigration laws. The Pope's constituency is borderless. It's the universal Roman Catholic Church. He doesn't have borders, right? It's the entire world. So the Pope cares first and foremost whether or not people escaping their countries have a safe haven that they could go to, right? So it's kind of an altogether different thing. But that being the case, it's great to have an American as Pope right now because he understands that nations have borders. And here's what he said just a few weeks ago flying back to Rome from Africa, the trip that he made to Africa, Algeria, where he went to the home of St. Augustine and everything. Quote, "Personally, I believe that a state has the right to regulate its borders." That's what Leo said. "I am not saying that everyone must be allowed to enter without order, sometimes creating in destination countries situations more unjust than those left behind." Wow, that's somebody that gets it, right? Mm-hmm. "But that said, I ask myself, what are we doing in richer countries to change the situation in poorer countries?" Well, all right. Good. I would say what's Mexico and some of these other countries doing to keep people from leaving their own country to begin with, but we get that.
Right.
And then he added, "And another point that I would like to make is that in any case, these people are human beings, and we must treat human beings humanely, not treat them worse than animals, as often happens. It is a very big challenge. A country can say that it cannot receive more than a certain number of people." That's what the Pope says. "But when people arrive, they are human beings and deserve the respect that belongs to every human being because of their dignity." So, and then he also added, he said this as well. So he said that just a few weeks ago. And then he said in November, all right, "I think that every country has the right to determine who enters, how, and when. Every country has a right to determine that. If someone is in the United States illegally, there are ways to address this. There are courts. There is a judicial system. I believe there are many problems in the system. No one has said that the United States should have open borders." And then last thing that he said, and you know, I don't care how conservative you are, you've got to be sympathetic to this. "But when people have lived good lives, many of them for 10, 15, 20 years, already in a country, been there that long, treating them in a way that is, to say the least, extremely disrespectful and with instances of violence is troubling." So really, I mean, he's saying what a pope would say about this stuff. Although he's saying it kind of like an American pope, right? I live in a country that has to have borders, and you should have the right to determine as a country what those borders are and who enters when and how. Right. So he's really not far off.
I have sympathy for popes who have to navigate the fact that also a lot of their constituents, a lot of Catholics, come from countries that want to migrate to the United States want to migrate to these other countries. Like, I'm very sympathetic.
And are of the ethnicity of his mother.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm sympathetic to it, but I'm not going to throw it back at you personally, but if someone says to you, "Paul, what are you talking about? We just had the rape gang report come out from British members of parliament.
Sure.
Last month. And on that same day, he releases a statement that says nothing about the rape gangs or Islam or radicalism and the decline of faith in the West. Instead, it says, well, we should treat all of these individuals individually, which is fine. Yeah, I agree with that.
Right.
Treat individual cases as individual cases. But you have a ton to say about treating migrants with human dignity.
Yeah.
How about you say something to the migrants to treat their host nations with some dignity too, and acknowledge what Aquinas says in the Summa, where he talks about the fact that immigration can be a boon or of the detriment to the common good,
right.
And the challenge of the statesman and the Catholic thinker too is to balance those things. Even you had Pope Francis in one of those bull in the china shop moments when he did that interview with NBC News towards the end of his pontificate say, sometimes immigration is good and can help people. Other times immigration, well, you get the Italian mafia. Like he said that, right? Do you remember that? Yeah. Do you remember that interview?
Yeah, exactly.
And, more recently, over the last few days, he's gone to different sites where migrants have tried to enter Europe illegally, and he's prayed, and I get it. Pray for the souls of those people. It's a tragedy, 120%. But there is a political theater, an aspect of this that maybe he doesn't realize it, maybe the Vatican doesn't realize it, that it's consumed as political theater, and it drives, I think, people in the administration who are Catholic, who are seriously Catholic, who are working on this issue, a little bit crazy to see like, hey, 120%, we agree with everything that you just read of Pope Leo XIV, Paul. Where's the help from them on this issue of the detriment that this causes to people already in the community who we have an obligation to serve?
Yeah, well, if if you were there to ask him a question like that, he'd probably agree with you, frankly. And in fact, the quote that I read was actually prompted by a question from, I think it was Anne Louise Taggart, the Newsmax reporter on the plane. And so often, these answers come from being prompted with those questions, right? And he will say things like, yeah, I'm not saying, and so forth. And over time, who knows, he'll probably say some of those things as well. He does say, and this gets to the Iran question, he said, I'm not a politician, right? And I would urge this to conservatives, especially conservatives who email me all the time, who don't like, they say all the time, why isn't the Pope saying this? Why? And a lot of times they're thinking like American political people, right? He's the Pope, so he's not going to weigh in on every political, ideological issue. Now, in regard to, if you look up AI and say, has Pope Leo declared the U.S. war with Iran an unjust war? It says that he has. He has not. And I wrote a piece on this for American Spectator. People could look it up. And the link that AI gives you to that is a link to an interview where he's being asked if it's an unjust war. And he uses the word unjust, and he applies it to the Iranians, to the Iranian regime, which he calls an unjust regime. So this is what AI does, right? It takes text and like kind of Iran, unjust, right, war, and kind of puts it, and doesn't always get this exactly right. So he's never declared it an unjust war, unlike some of the American bishops. And in fact, the Cardinal of the Francis appointed here in Washington, D.C., right? It was the interview at McElroy. It was the interview, and Donald Trump later said this to the NBC interviewer. He later said, what really set me off with the Truth Social post against the Pope was the 60 Minutes interview with the 3 liberal bishops. And McElroy went right out, unjust war, unjust, this kind of thing. Not with the care that Leo speaks, right?
Right.
But
there are injustices in something that can be a larger just project that should be rectified later on. Of course, there's the Iranian regime is an unjust regime.
Yeah, he did call it unjust.
He has been very careful in the way that he communicates about the Iran war. I think much more careful with that than he has with the immigration issue. I also think that he's the Pope. Every pope's going to be against every war.
Yeah, John Paul II declared the war with Iraq unjust.
Yes,
flat out.
And I'm totally fine with popes being generally anti-war.
And George W. Bush didn't launch on him either.
Right.
Liberal pope, right? Weak, right?
But I'm okay with that because there is a failure of politics that ultimately ends up with war, right? And what you would prefer if you were the Pope is to have politics succeed. Now, the failure of politics can be a failure of persuasion on behalf of somebody who says you're doing an unjust thing, you need to stop doing that unjust thing. It could be a failure of being persuaded by an evil regime who fails to live up to its commitments to its own people or things like that. There's a failure of politics that happens when a war breaks out. And so I think it's pretty natural for the Pope to keep very high bars on what qualifies as justice in wartime.
And they generally pray for peace.
Peace.
Which is why people say, was that bother you? I'm like, well, no, I just expect the Pope to pray for peace. The Pope's just going to be against war. I mean,
that's fine.
Yeah.
It's good, actually.
Yeah. I mean, go back and read papal statements on World War I and World War II, right? The Pope never comes out in favor of war. They just don't, right? They just generally pray for peace. And
they feel that human cost too.
Yeah.
Even for the people who are on the quote unquote right side of history, as we call it.
Yeah. And one of the controversial statements from Leo XIV was, God does not bless those who wage war. Right. And I would point out to people, in fact, one of my friends who doesn't like Leo said the Pope just spit on the graves of the fathers of my wife and I, who both served in World War II. I said, wait a second, the Pope's dad fought in Normandy, all right? He was on Omaha Beach, all right? I think what he means by that is people who engage in war, people who provoke war, right? The Hirohitos and Pearl Harbor and Hitler, He understands the need for defensive war and responding. He's an expert on Augustine, the head of the Augustinian order.
Right.
He called himself a son of Augustine. In fact, he probably would have taken the name Pope Augustine, but he probably thought that might have been too much, right? Especially after Francis took the name of Francis. No one had ever used St. Francis's name before. But he's an expert on just war doctrine. He actually knows it. And if you were to apply the Jus ad bellum, if you were to go through the just war documents and just war doctrine and apply it to the war with Iran, among the other things it says is you have to have a clearly defined objective, right? And a plan of action as to how this is going to end. And the other one that really struck me, and I think everybody should understand what Pope Leo was saying here, you don't target civilian populations. And the first time that Leo actually addressed Donald Trump by name, all right, almost referred to the Trump administration, was when Trump came out 2 days after Easter Sunday. It was a Tuesday. He had Easter Sunday, 8:03 a.m. Truth Social posts, right? Open the Strait of Hormuz, you crazy B words, right? You're going to be rotting in hell, right? Praise be to Allah. Open the effing Strait of Hormuz, you crazy B words.
Yeah.
And then 2 days later came the Easter Tuesday post, where he said, tonight an entire civilization will be wiped off the face of the earth, right? I hope it doesn't happen, but it probably will.
Yeah.
All right. That prompted the Pope, who at that point has a moral obligation to say something.
Right. The red flag goes up at that point.
At that point, the Pope said, statements about wiping out entire civilizations of people are truly unacceptable. He didn't even use the word morally unacceptable. He didn't even say unjust. He just said statements about are truly unacceptable, right? And even Trump, in the exchange, he said, I don't want to get into an argument with him. He didn't even say Donald Trump, right? He's being careful not to use the T word.
So, yeah, I think it's been an interesting back and forth throughout the Iran war conflict. Of course, that has taken more of a back seat now. The Pope prays for peace. That's what he does.
But it's a shame because a lot of conservatives now hate the Pope, and I've seen it.
Yeah, no, I think the immigration one is going to be the stickiest wicket because that is the number one issue facing this country. It's been the number one issue facing this country for the last 10 years. And if we don't get that under control, you think that countries should have their borders and should be able to regulate who's in and who's out. But we have 20, 30 million people here illegally, and we need to figure out some way to get them out.
And the Pope says you have a right to determine who enters and how and when.
Right. And
so
you have the right to determine that,
and I wouldn't expect him to say anything more than that, right? He's going to speak in some generalities. He's not going to get in policy disputes.
Right.
He's not going to, and I know people will say, why doesn't he have this position? They just generally don't do that. You're asking a pope to be a politician.
If the Pope were to come out and say more about the respectability of the host nation's population, that those people have dignity too, I think it would go a long way in healing that divide. And I think they're working on healing that divide right now, the Trump administration and, of course, the Vatican that have been in this tiff. So tell us a little bit as we start to wrap up here about ways in which the Vatican and the Trump administration have been trying to find common ground, to find consensus and heal this division.
It started immediately. So the actual formal installation of the Pope came like 10 days, I think it was May 18th. He comes out onto the loggia. He's picked at that point, May 7th, May 8th. That's when the conclave starts. Comes out on the loggia, is picked by the College of Cardinals. 10 days later, the formal installation, May 18th. That's on a Sunday, extraordinary day. That's where he's given the fisherman's ring and everything. Literally the next day, Monday morning, among his first morning appointments, he's with Rubio and Vance. And by the way, Brad, the picture of that meeting is really cool because the three of them are just like have this big smile. And I know one of them must have said, none of us could have possibly imagined that we'd be sitting here like a year ago. By the way, I haven't said this. The Pope's a Republican. I don't know if you guys know that, but Robert Francis Prevost we have the voting records, and it voted repeatedly in the Republican primary in Illinois when he came back from Peru in the 2010s. 2010, 2012, 2014, 2016, 2018, voted absentee ballot from the Vatican, 2020. all strictly in the Republican primaries, never in the Democratic primary. He very well may have voted for Donald Trump. All right. And in fact, when he was talking to Rubio, he voted in the 2016 presidential primary. He might have said to Rubio, hey, I voted for you in the 2016 primary. Who knows, right? So he's a Republican. He's not a Democrat. He's been a Republican longer than Donald Trump has, all right? All right? He's been pro-life his entire life, been against gay marriage his entire life, been against gender ideology his entire life. But they'll continue to meet, and at some point, he'll meet with Donald Trump, too. Now, Trump said a few weeks ago when he was asked if he wanted to meet with the Pope, he said, I don't want to paraphrase again, but he said something like, no, not right now. But this Pope is very diplomatic, and he'll sit down and meet with him. And Donald Trump met with Pope Francis, and everybody said, oh, this is going to be a war. These two, this is going to be like a steel cage match, right? They're going to argue about, and you get these beautiful pictures where they're both smiling and shaking hands. And Trump will meet with Leo, and he'll get along with him. So yeah, this will be better, and it will get better.
So it started right away, but more recently,
they're already working on
Rubio has been going to the Vatican. He presented him with the crystal football.
Yeah.
The vice president, of course, has a new book out on his conversion to the Catholic faith. I mean, as you look forward,
and Rubio's memoirs has a lot about his own conversion to the Catholic. That's one of the better political memoirs I ever read. In fact, he talks about reading Scott Hahn and Rome Sweet Home and so forth. But that picture of the three of them together, May 18th, May 19th, whatever it was, at the Vatican, that really struck me, Brad, because that's the future of American Catholicism. You got an American Pope, and one of those two guys is probably going to be the next American president, and they're both Catholic. And they might even be on the same ticket together in 2028, right? Vance and Rubio. So right there, that's the future, those three. But it's more important that those three get along.
Aside from a Trump-Leo summit, where do you think in the near term this goes from here, using the Vance-Rubio Catholic identity to continue to move things in a better direction?
No, I think it'll continue to improve, especially as I don't know what's going to happen with Iran. But I mean, I'm surprised that we're not hearing from a lot of Pope Leo haters on Iran saying, well, I don't know, maybe we should reconsider what the Pope was saying about Iran. I mean, gosh, we did all that stuff there and bombed it like crazy and a straight orbit. What's come from that, right? Do we have an agreement? It seems like we always have an agreement. We always have the big deal, the art of the deal. Did we get it yet? When's it going to happen? Boy, this is like Greenland. This is like Canada, 51st state. All this fuss about all this stuff in Iran, and where is this now? What's happened? Maybe the Pope was right.
You think if Marco
to cool everything?
You think if Marco and JD get a deal, that the Pope will come out in support of a non-nuclear proliferation deal?
Yeah, probably. I would think so. And the Donald Trump repeated statement multiple times. Quote, the Pope thinks it's okay for Iran to have nuclear weapons. That prompted the Pope to come out and the Vatican to say, the Pope does not think it's okay for Iran to have nuclear weapons. He's against nuclear weapons, right? So yeah, I would think that he would be supportive of that. Sure, he's supportive of a peace and a ceasefire and some sort of agreement on non-proliferation.
Things move slow, of course, in the Vatican,
right?
But as we look forward, of course, to the AI revolution that's taking place before our eyes, is there anything? Last question for you: is there anything that our audience should be paying attention to on the Catholic Church's approach to AI following this latest encyclical?
No, it's a good question. He's young, right? So he is he 60? Yeah, I should know that one.
70.
I know that. Yeah, 70. Yes, 70. That's exactly right. He was picked when he was 69. He's in good shape. Presumably, I mean, he was going to be Pope for a while, hope, right? And he'll continue to follow this issue. But I think, generally speaking, he's kind of the right man at the right time. It's good right now at this point in time to have this particular Pope at the time of the AI revolution. As much of a genius as Cardinal Ratzinger was, Benedict XVI, John Paul II. John Paul II was acted, was a playwright, wrote poems, and was a philosopher, an expert on phenomenology, right? He wasn't somebody who knew technology really well. So this is something that Leo XIV actually knows and can probably provide some good moral guidance.
Paul Kengor, Thank you for coming on the Signal Sit-Down.
Thanks, Brad. Good to be here. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sit-Down. If you liked what you heard here today, be sure to hit like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever before you go. And we love your feedback. It really does help the show. So please remember to leave us a review and comment who you'd like to see on future episodes of the Signal Sit-Down. It's because of your support and your interest and your engagement that allows us to continue this incredibly fun work. And together, we'll continue to expose how Washington really works and affect real change. We'll see you next time on the Signal Sit-Down.